And I just want to start by saying thank you to the 15 countries that we did receive responses to on the questionnaire. And I think this gives us a really good snapshot of where things are going in several regions around the world. Again, it's obviously not an exclusive list. I will say to those of you that if you did not have a chance to do the questionnaire before the conference, please feel free. We will recirculate the link. Please feel free to go in and fill it out. Or if upon reflection or things have changed between when you responded and here, if you want to go in and resubmit, please do that as well. Looking at this, one thing that we can clearly see from these 15 countries is that these countries globally do have experience with making regulatory decisions on agricultural biotechnology generally. So this is not a new area for countries, though the specific animal aspects may be new. There is familiarity globally with making decisions in agricultural biotechnology. And not surprisingly, that follows with agricultural biotechnology research. Where is it occurring? There are countries that are making investments in plant, animal, and insect research, some that are doing plant research, plants and insects, you name it, those various criteria. But it is happening globally. We've heard a lot about research collaboration, but I think this also does highlight that there is a lot of research going on locally, specific to local conditions. So that's exciting and it's promising that there are products being developed that will need that path to market we've been talking. Countries have a pathway, a regulatory framework that allows animal biotechnology to be reviewed. And again, we are seeing that globally, these systems are in place or are being developed. So of our 15 respondents, you can see that overwhelmingly, they do have frameworks that allow for evaluation of animal biotechnology. Now, again, I'm using the small b or big B sense of biotechnology. This could include GMO, as it's often referred to globally, as well as genome editing, but the frameworks are there. And then I think what a lot of us here are really concerned about is if we look towards genome editing, are there regulatory frameworks that allow for exemptions for certain genome edited animals? And these are the countries that have said yes. Now, I do want to take a step back here because we've talked a lot about using terms, term confusion, what do things mean? And I specifically put genome edited. I'm not going to use Allison's Reddit air quotes, but the reason I did that is because I think there is still globally confusion, discussion, debate about what genome editing actually means when we talk about it in this context, and even in a regulatory context. And I think it's important that we consider that. I think there is a trend, a movement towards considering genome editing to mean certain applications of biotechnology that are cisgenic, broadly speaking, that are not transgenic, broadly speaking. Things that could have been achieved through conventional breeding or are found in nature, broadly speaking. Do those terms mean the same thing? Is there overlap? If we did a Venn diagram, how close is it going to be to one circle? But I think those are things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about genome editing. To some people, genome editing is a group of tools, right? That can be used to do things differently, quicker, more precise than the older recombinant rDNA technology. But again, I think the ethos is moving globally towards using genome editing as shorthand for applications of agricultural biotechnology that are not transgenic. And that certainly, I think, is the spirit that a lot of our respondents viewed this question through. So these are the countries, United States, Argentina. I will say, I have had some conversations. Brazil did not answer this question, but Brazil should be on this list as well. Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Australia, all reporting systems that allow exemptions for certain genome edited animals from their existing regulatory framework that they would apply to GMO animals. There are other countries that are doing this. So again, this is an interesting development, and I think something that we've touched on and talked about, a central theme of this conference. You know, insects, of course, are very important for very different reasons globally, and we can see that a lot of countries, again, including Brazil, also have provisions for insects in their regulatory frameworks. Those could be provisions that are specific to insects, or a regulatory framework that is broad enough to encompass that insects would be considered along with all other animals. And this is another interesting question too. Does your country have regulatory considerations beyond safety in evaluating animal biotechnologies? And you know, I think this is an important question for a couple reasons to look at. Globally, you know, regulatory systems are generally designed to do very specific things, right? They generally have a statutory basis. Regulations are promulgated that says specifically what they are going to address. And in most cases, that is going to be tailored to an agenda that's designed, right, to evaluate and address risk associated with potentially animal health, human health, food safety, environmental safety. They're not generally designed to make broader societal determinations about whether a technology is good or bad, whether it should be used in a given country, area. And many countries don't actually have provisions to do that in any formal way. So regulatory systems can seem to people to be the place to do that. And some countries have in fact put in considerations beyond the, I think, traditional regulatory framework of health and safety. And those can be things such as societal risks or benefits, economics, ethics. It could also be things such as licensure suitability, which is something that Australia has reported as a consideration. So again, not a big global trend towards considering these things, but there are countries that do have this in their regulatory framework. You know, risk identification criteria is also something that can vary between countries, looking at their regulatory paradigms. There are some countries in evaluating animal biotechnology that are only really evaluating risks that are unique to the biotechnology, not generally risks associated with the subject animal generally. There are other countries that have regulatory systems that have to evaluate all potential hazards. And I use the word have to instead of choose to. Again, it's going to vary depending on country, but that is going to be dictated largely by what the statutory framework is that they have for evaluating risk. If we look globally, we touched on some of these questions in Eric's presentation yesterday, talking about environmental risk assessment. Is it the unique risk that the actual genome edit or biotechnology change presents, or is it the risk that the animal generally presents to the environment? And regulatory systems may be designed that they have to evaluate all those risks, or they may be designed that they can look specifically at as their unique risk characteristic based on the genetic change. So again, we do see diversity globally in how regulatory systems address that particular question. The other thing too that regulatory systems can consider is potential benefits. And this can certainly become an interesting question when we look at if there is potential detriment or harm from a genome edit. We were talking about off targets. I think there's growing pretty universal agreement that that's not a serious issue, but if there were that caused some minor harm or detriment? Does the greater overall benefit, for example, of disease resistance, come into play to mitigate some of that effect? And we do see that there are countries, and again, Brazil would be on this list as well, that do have mechanisms for considering potential benefits. Provision for deregulation is another key thing. And again, deregulation can mean different things in different contexts. There can be country-specific provisions of what that means. It can be pre-regulatory decision deregulation, post-regulatory decision deregulation. But we do see, and I think, again, this applies most specifically to those suites of applications that fall under that genome editing umbrella. If we choose to use that to mean things that are cisgenic, could be achieved through conventional breeding found in nature, moving towards systems to deregulate the use of some of those technologies. Again, that does not mean that they're not going through safety assessments or regulatory review. There may not be specific provisions put on the end product being the animal. This is another thing, another area that can really be a barrier to research, especially with large animals. Is there an off-ramp for research animals where low-risk research animals can enter the food supply? We don't see a lot of provision for that. Again, this is information that was provided by countries in terms of, is there a provision for low-risk research animals to enter the food supply? We see only 3 countries responded yes here. Food labeling is also another big issue. Are all products of animal biotechnology going to be labeled? If we look historically to the older technology, the rDNA technology, GMO, as most of the world likes to call that, we do see very broad consensus globally in terms of regulatory requirements, industry, for labeling of GMO products, for distinction in the supply chain on the grocery store shelf. However, when we look specifically at the regulatory framework for animal biotechnology, we do not see a lot of countries that have food labeling, that are reporting food labeling considerations as part of their regulatory framework for evaluating animal biotechnology. So again, not an area where we see a strong global trend. Other areas, consideration of animal health and welfare in the approval process. Again, this is going to depend on how the regulatory framework for a country is structured and where the underlying authority lies. If we look to the plant world, I think, we know there's been a lot of concern over the years, right? About GMOs, plant breeding. Is it safe? Is it healthy? Is it good for the environment? But one thing you don't really hear a lot of people talking about or seem to care about, I'm sure if you're an agronomist, you care, but what about the health and welfare of the plant itself? If your particular biotechnology innovation causes some harm to the plant, that's really never been part of the debate. But when it comes to animals, we do know, right, that there's a lot more concern. People are a lot more concerned about the health and welfare of animals. And is that being addressed in the regulatory system? And again, it's not like a broken record here, but I think it depends on where the authority, where the basis for the regulatory system is coming from. I'm not the respondent for the United States, but if you look at our example, the regulatory framework that we use to evaluate animal biotechnology is based on a body of law that very specifically applies to protecting and promoting health. So that is a consideration that is baked into the regulatory review system. Provisions for post-approval monitoring is another big question I think that countries are grappling with. If you make a regulatory decision on an animal biotech application, be it genome editing or otherwise, are there provisions for monitoring, for adverse event reporting, post-approval? And these are the countries that are reporting provisions for post-approval monitoring. And again, not a lot of them. Animal location, number reporting requirements. These are the countries that are reporting that they have requirements there in terms of, do we need to know where animals are? How many are there? Now, in some cases, this could be requirements for all animals, and some it could depend. It can vary based on what the actual application is. But again, we do not see a lot of countries that are reporting requirements in this area. And one of the final questions, I think it's a nice capstone that was on the questionnaire, is what is the main driver of animal biotechnology regulation? And again, this comes to addressing that question of what is the underlying authority that countries are using to establish these regulatory frameworks. And this is just a snapshot from a couple places around the world of what countries reported as the rationale, the main driver of their animal biotechnology regulations. So for example, Australia, protecting health and safety of people and the environment from risks. In Guatemala, access to new technologies to produce food, provide scientifically proven assurance on the safety of biotechnologically obtained animals. And in Kenya, all GMOs are subject to regulation under the Biosafety Act of 2009. And I think generally from here, again, I think we can see what are some of the drivers of regulatory systems in different countries. They may be very focused on health and safety. And that focus may be on the people, it may be on the environment, it may be on the animal, it may be on some combination of those three. Some countries have adopted new laws and regulations specific to the advances in genome editing that are designed to not only evaluate the products themselves, but to actually promote them and create a path for innovation. Some countries have very specific laws and regulations that require regulatory systems to be developed to keep pace with current development. So we do see different drivers for animal biotechnology regulation globally, but we are seeing a lot of countries looking at this issue and trying to address it, given all the tremendous advancements we've talked about over the last now 3 days. And now, since I have the floor, I'm just going to editorialize for a few minutes here. I think this is really important. These conversations, these events are very important because there's a lot of potential out there. Animal breeding has come a long way. We've heard about that. We heard about that on Monday. 2-month-old calves being mothers of the next generation is incredible and astounding. And these tools animal breeders have used to create a wide variety of breeds, strains, types of animals globally that fill different niches that have been adaptable over time. Even in the last 100 years, the pig went from being an animal bred primarily for lard production, right? World War II, lard from pigs was a very important component of developing munitions, feeding people during World War II, to today where we have a very lean animal that predominates commercially globally. But that comes at a price, right? That specialization comes at a price. And is genome editing going to allow us to get to the next step? And I think it can. And we talk about communication, communicating to people. This is the example that I like to use with lay audiences of why is genome editing important? What can it do for us that our existing tools can't? And I like this example for a couple of reasons. But I basically, my example is, well, take the dog. And say we discover a Great Dane that's resistant to heartworm. That's a great trait, right? Heartworm, very damaging to canine health. People know about it. They give, hopefully, preventative medicine to their pets. But if we wanted to give that trait to the Chihuahua, How can we do that? Well, you could do it through conventional breeding. Hopefully, in this case, you do it very carefully. That's all I'll say about that. But it is possible, right? But what are you going to get? You're going to get animals that are half Chihuahua and half Great Dane. And over generations, right, you'd have to try and breed back to the Chihuahua, get rid of all the Great Dane characteristics except the one. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just move that one gene to protect all Chihuahuas from heartworm? And this does seem to resonate with people. Again, to help overcome that perception bias, that bias a lot of people have when they hear the word genetic, that leads their mind to something scary. And we all have it. I'm guilty of it myself. And the dog is another good example. Here's something you don't really need to know about me, but I hate the sound of barking dogs. I hate it. I hate it. If I'm at night, if I'm going to bed, I hear dogs barking, it just sets me on edge, And my first night that I was here at the conference, I was kind of upset. I'm like, why am I hearing so many barking dogs? Where are all these barking dogs around here? And it kind of put me in a bad mood as I went to sleep. Well, yesterday, it finally dawned on me that, no, I'm not actually hearing a lot of barking dogs. What I'm hearing is a lot of monkey chatter in the woods around the hotel. And the moment I heard that I realized it was monkeys, not dogs, it turned in my head from being something that was incredibly annoying to something that was interesting and fascinating. Because in Virginia, I don't fall asleep hearing monkeys chatter in the woods. And frankly, I hope I never do, because that would be a bigger problem. But, my point is, it was the exact same sound one night to another, but having more understanding completely changed my attitude towards it. Apologies to those of you who are from Brazil who may find it annoying, but it just goes to show. So I'll stop my little sermon here, but hopefully this is a good precursor to what we're going to be talking about today in terms of where countries are going. And please, if you saw things that surprised you on that, talk to the countries that are here to get a better understanding of where they're going. And again, one more plug, if you didn't get a chance to respond to the questionnaire, please do so.